Based on the information currently available from credible sources, particularly the Sports Illustrated profile, Hells on Wheels, and regional reporting from Montana outlets. This program contains discussions of real-life crimes and may not be suitable for all audiences. When Darkness Falls is created for educational and awareness purposes, every effort has been made to ensure accuracy, and we tell these stories with deep respect for the victims, their families, and their communities. The goal is not to sensationalize, but to remember, to understand, and to learn. Christmas night in 1997, in a quiet Montana town along the edge of Flathead Lake, a man never made it home after checking on his neighbor's house. And the truth behind what happened would shock the community that thought it was safe. I came across this case and it stopped me cold. It's one of those stories that reminds you how thin the line can be between triumph and then tragedy. A chilling example of life that unraveled completely, not in spite of success, but right beside it. Almost if the two walked hand in hand until everything fell apart. When darkness falls, some victories come with a price. If you're already subscribed, truly thank you for being part of this growing community. Every share, every comment, it all keeps the light burning for the victims, families, and friends. Here is another case that deserves to be remembered. The night Big Fork lost its peace. In a small lake town of Big Fork, Montana, Christmas Eve was supposed to be quiet, but in 1997 would end with gunfire echoing through the pine trees, and the kind of betrayal no one saw coming. Big Fork was the kind of Montana town where people still waved at passing cars, and most didn't bother locking their doors. Everyone knew your name. It's surrounded by nature, full of lakes, hikes and trails, and art galleries. It's one of the 100's best small towns to live in, but as you know, the prettiest and calmest towns often hide something in the darkness. Larry Streeter built his life at the intersection of Highway 35 and 83, a simple store that became a meeting place for locals, travelers, truckers cutting through the valley. They'd stop for fuel, coffee, and a quick word with the man behind the counter, who somehow made everyone feel like they'd come home. He'd worked hard for it, long days, cold nights, building one business at a time. Streeter's Corner wasn't just a store, it was a mark on the map. At that corner, the place that carried his name would soon become the starting point of the story. He was a longtime resident, a businessman who ran a small motel and managed the local store with his wife, Serena. They had been preparing for a family Christmas Eve, the kind of night built on routine and not risks. On the other side of town, there lived the Ernst family, Debbie and Ed. They were married and were barely kids themselves. She was 18 and he was 19. And together, they believed love and faith could build a life from the ground up. They settled in Big Fork, a postcard town tucked between mountains and the water. Ed and Debbie Ernst, they had raised two boys, Ted and Jesse, in a log cabin outside of Big Fork. Ed had built it himself. Ed was a horse logger, a man who worked the forest the old way, with teams of horses pulling felled trees. It was grueling work, but it taught discipline and patience. And also, he was an assistant pastor at a local church. Now, they raised their boys with Christian values, them going to church every Sunday. Debbie was the heart of the home. She felt the cabin was structured and a steady love for her sons. Faith was not just a Sunday activity to them. It was woven into their daily lives. At Christmas, the Ernst cabin came alive. A small pine tree cut from a nearby wood in the corner of the home, decorated with handmade items. And if the boys were lucky, they'd have a few store-bought glass ornaments also. Now, their first son is Ted, and Ted was all energy, a child who laughed louder than the forest. But he carried a secret that the world couldn't see. He was born with spinal bifida. Some say it was rare, a neutral tube defect that, in Ted's case, left part of his spine exposed. Just 4 years old, surgeons had fused his neck, taking away the ability to turn his head. But Ted never let that define him. He was determined, bright little boy, and who refused to slow down. Every morning he and his dad ran races, not just for fitness, but for freedom. For that quite unspoken bond between father and son, who understood that sometimes the hardest battles are fought just to keep running. Jesse came next, slower to speak, slower to learn, but never without joy. What he lacked in words, he made up for it in his heart. Jesse idolized his big brother Ted. For all his own challenges, he was his protector, his partner, in every little adventure. The two brothers, bound by more than blood, growing up under the shadow of the mountains and the light of their parents' faith. August 1989, Ted and Jesse were out on the family's property. Two brothers with nothing but time and summer air between them. Climbing trees was their favorite thing to do. It was freedom. It was a game. It was a childhood in the purest form. That afternoon, the boys had gotten into trouble, the kind that comes with muddy shoes and guilty smiles. And when Debbie said those timeless words that we all know, "Wait till your father gets home," they both knew they were in for it. So, in that innocent rush of panic and love, they decided to meet him first, to catch their dad before he walked through the door, to explain what happened, to soften the storm before it began. They picked the tallest fir on the land, the kind that seemed to touch the clouds, hoping to catch the first glimpse of their father's truck coming down the road. Jesse went up first, and he jumped onto a young branch. He did hear a crack and laughed it off. Ted followed, maybe teasing, maybe trying to climb just a little bit higher, but then the branch gave way. 6 feet down, and on the way down, his spine hit a big branch. Ted hit the ground hard. His spine was severed. From that moment forward, life would never be the same. Ted would survive, but barely. The boy who loved to climb trees would never walk again. While the town called it a miracle, Jesse called it his fault. He was 9, and he would carry the guilt like a scar. Ted refused pity. After the accident, many assumed Ted's story would be one of limitation, a boy in a wheelchair, adjusting to life he never expected. But Ted, he refused to let that define him. Ted's first months in a wheelchair were difficult. He had to relearn every little simple task, how to get dressed, how to move through doorways, how to navigate a world built for walking. Physical therapy sessions left him exhausted, but there was a fire in him. Ted's word after the grueling therapy day, "If I can't walk, I'll find another way to race." What happened next stunned everyone, his family, his community, and even himself. Within a year, he was pushing through rehab faster, stronger than anyone expected. The community raised money for a racing chair, and soon the boy fallen from a tree was flying down the finish lines. For years, Ted was Big Fork's reminder that tragedy didn't have to end a life, it would refine it. The boy who'd once fallen from the tree had become a man who refused to fall again. The accident bound the brothers together in a way that was both beautiful and tragic. Ted's resilience became a beacon. Jesse's guilt became a chain. And as years passed, their bond would carry them from triumph into darkness. Glory has a shelf. By the end of mid-1990s, the medals stopped coming. Sponsors faded. Ted's body began to give out before his will did. His shoulders screamed from overuse. His upper back knotted from years of strain. The same strength that once carried him through cheering crowds was now breaking him down, piece by piece. Doctors had advised him to slow down. The pain wasn't just fatigue. It was his body's quiet rebellion after years of pushing work. It was all catching up to him. But for Ted, slowing down felt too much like surrender. Wheelchair racing was expensive. Custom chairs, tires, travel. By 1996, the money was gone. The dream that once defined him had become a bill he couldn't pay. So he traded speed for stability. A full-time job at a computer tech company in the Valley. Steady hours, steady pay. But the man who once raced the wind now sat behind a desk, watching it blow past the window. Friends said he had grown quieter, withdrawn. The smile he once wore for cameras now vanished in private. The praise had stopped, but the pressure hadn't. Ted had built his entire identity around defining weakness. But when the noise faded, he couldn't hear who he was anymore, and that silence became unbearable. He started spending nights alone, scrolling, pacing, plotting. A man who once conquered mountains was now fighting ghosts only he could see. By Christmas of '97, Big Fork had settled into its winter rhythm, the kind of quiet only small-town Montana knows. Families trimmed trees, shop lights glowed on Main Street, and somewhere beyond the lake, one man couldn't shake the weight of his own failure. Ted had drifted so far from the cheering crowds, restless, bitter, broke, and searching for something to blame. The only person who still believed in him was his younger brother, Jesse. For Jesse's life after the accident had always been about making it up to Ted. He never said it outright, but he carried that weight. If I hadn't bounced on that branch, Ted wouldn't be paralyzed. So when Ted started suggesting small pranks, sneaking into sheds, stealing signs, that sort of thing, Jesse went along. He told himself it was harmless, a way to spend time with his brother, a way to keep Ted's spirit alive. But small pranks became something much bigger. '96, the Ernst brothers had turned into burglaries, into kind of a sport. They carried radios to communicate, just like Ted once used on the race course. They drew floor plans, marked out the entry points, and sometimes even bought disguises. It wasn't about stealing of need. Both had roofs over their head and food on the table. It was about the thrill. And as Ted's later admitted, burglary became his sport. The same way he once chased finish lines, now he chased the rush of breaking into homes. What started out small thefts, tools, cash, bits of jewelry, turned burglary after burglary. Ted planned them. Jesse drove the car. They called it survival, but what they were building was a storm. By Christmas Eve '97, Big Fork was wrapped in its usual quiet postcard town, asleep under the falling snow. Families gathered by firelight, church bells echoed over the lake, and not far from that shoreline, two brothers sat waiting for darkness to do its work. That night they chose a lakeside property belonging to a wealthy family who spent winters away. Ted knew the house well. Everyone in town did. It was the home Larry Streeter looked after while they were away. Across town, Larry Streeter was closing up his motel. A businessman, husband, grandfather, the kind of man people trusted. The same night, Larry and his wife, Serena, were finishing a late-night meeting at a motel they'd ran together. As they locked the office, she reached for her coat, and Larry told her, "You go home. I'll swing by at the Bradshaw place just to make sure everything's locked up." It was a routine he'd done before 100 times. Serena drove home, but Larry didn't. A home that unfortunately had already drawn the attention of Ted and Jesse. Vehicles' headlights crawling down the rural road 2 figures inside, one behind the wheel and one staring out the window. They chose a Christmas Eve because no one was supposed to be around. Inside the house, they moved quietly, tools in hand, lights off. Inside or near the garage, Ted and Jesse were in the middle of the burglary. They had broken in to steal the guns, tools, and collectible items. They had dumped out drawers, went through everything. Then headlights cut through the trees. Larry Streeter had arrived. When Larry pulled up, the snow had started to fall harder. He saw the vehicle parked by the gate. He recognized it immediately. It was Ted's, a face he'd seen around town. Wheelchair athlete everyone admired. But admiration faded fast when Larry realized what they were really doing there. Larry got out of his truck and called out to Ted, reportedly asking what he was doing there. Ted panicked. He knew he'd been caught by someone who could identify him. Not a stranger, but a man well respected in town. He had asked for Ted's driver's license, and Ted gave it to him. Larry reached into Ted's car and grabbed the gun, and then he reached for his phone to dial 911. Later, investigators did discover he had dialed 911, but the call never went through. The cell signal dropped. As Larry turned to step back toward his car, Ted opened fire. The first shot cracked through the cold air, echoing. Then another, then another. He fired only a few feet away from his car, close enough for the muzzle flash to catch the snow. The bullet struck Larry in the chest and arms, one finding his head. The last gunshot was the fatal one. When the echoes faded, silence settled in, the kind of silence that feels heavier than sound itself. Ted was using a .22 caliber pistol, one of several stolen from earlier burglaries. Jesse, who was nearby, said he screamed for Ted to stop, but was ignored. The brothers left in a hurry, but Ted somehow, at some point later that night, realized his driver's license and possibly left other evidence. Panic turned them around. Against every instinct, the brothers went back, returning to the crime scene. They had just fled, moving Larry's body slightly while retrieving Ted's ID, which is why police later found a frozen boot print under the body, showing it had been disturbed. Ted made Jesse wear his smaller shoes to create a misleading set of smaller footprints, which the investigators later noted. Ted and Jesse fled the night, tires spinning through the fresh snow, hearts pounding harder than the engine beneath them. Later, investigators would piece it together, a single footprint found under Larry Streeter's body, frozen in place, proof that someone had come back and moved him. The prints around the house told investigators more than any witnesses could. 2 sets, one large, one small, overlapping in the snow like a silent confession. They moved together, weaving a path up toward the house and away from it. By the time the storm cleared, the evidence is preserved. It said more about the truth than anyone ever could. Morning light exposed what the dark had already tried to bury. Investigators logged everything, every indication, every casing, every blood pattern. Evidence bags began to pile into the hood of the patrol trucks. A spent .22 casing, a flashlight, Larry's cell phone, still lit with a half-dialed attempt to reach 911. This wasn't simple burglary turned sideways. The violence pointed somewhere deeper. 7 shots, not frantic, not accidental, but it was deliberate. Detective Pat Walsh stepped back and looked at the pattern. Now, for months, Big Fork had seen quite a lot of break-ins. Tools, gun, collectibles, things taken, but never lives. And in a town this size, word travels faster than squad cars. By sunrise, the valley already knew Larry Streeter, the motel owner, the neighbor everyone trusted, had been found dead near Bradshaw Lake property. Stores opened late, church bells carried differently. People who never locked their doors started locking them. Detectives canvassed the town, but in Big Fork, strangers stand out instantly, which meant this wasn't one. Before long, rumors drifted toward a familiar name, Ted Ernst, the hometown athlete, the young man who once represented everything hopeful about his community. Now surrounded by questions no one wanted to ask. Debt? Anger? A string of burglaries no one had ever tied him to? Piece by piece, the image of Ted became sharp, unforgiving, and focused. Weeks passed. The shock didn't. The town was still carrying the weight of Christmas Eve. And Jesse, just 16, quiet, overwhelmed, was carrying his own. A guilt showed up everywhere, in the way he walked to school and hallways, in his ability to sleep, in the way he avoided mirrors because he didn't want to see himself or what he became of. One day, he couldn't hold it anymore. He told a friend. He told the friend that him and Ted had been at the Broadchap property and Ted had fired the shots. The friend froze. A kid was confessing to murder. They went to the teacher. The teacher went to the authorities. Within days, the secret Jesse had tried to bury was sitting in front of the investigators who'd been trying to assemble the puzzle without him.
I don't remember, so I'm seriously, I don't remember.
He told them about the burglaries, the confrontation, the gunfire, the moment Ted shot a man they knew. The schoolhouse confession was a hinge in the case. It locked the forensic evidence into place. In the end, it wasn't just about science that pointed to the killer. It was a 16-year-old boy who couldn't carry the weight anymore. Within weeks, both brothers were arrested. Ted now faces deliberate homicide. Jesse faced homicide and burglary. In court, Jesse sat on only feet from his brother, eyes fixed on the floor, hands shaking. When he testified, the room went silent. He described the burglaries, the panic, the moment Larry called out Ted's name, and Ted pulling the trigger. Ted didn't deny shooting Larry. He tried to frame it was fear, not intent. But 7 shots into a man left in the snow wasn't fear, and the jury knew it. They found Ted guilty of deliberate homicide, life without parole. Jesse received 40 years and would one day walk free. He was released in the mid-2000s and formally cleared in 2001. By stepping outside a prison gate doesn't clear memory or guilt. For Big Fork, a town that once cheered Ted on from the sidelines, the verdict wasn't victory, it was grief. Time moves, people age, but the echo of that night really didn't leave. Ted remains behind bars. Big Fork didn't forget about that Christmas Eve. A man lost his life. 2 brothers were broken. And a community learned that even the brightest stories cast shadows long enough to reach the shores of a quiet Montana lake. Now, the only sound left is the wind on the water, a reminder that heroes can fall, and when the truth finally speaks, it does change everything. If you believe victims deserve dignity and real stories deserve to be told with care, please consider subscribing. It does help us continue making thoughtful, human-centered, true crime documentaries.